Pues vamos a terminar el tema.
Now we will wrap up the topic of labor with a digression on the Industrial Revolution.
Es importante porque una de las
This is important because one of the tired mantras that is often
me
repeated
acuerdo que es lo que estudié hasta
in school textbooks, it was in mine, in the specialized press, in the popular
se ha
press,
filtrado a través de la literatura.
and in literature, novels, works of art, etc. The novels of Charles Dickens are a typical example,
Por ejemplo,
is the following.
evidente que la revolución industrial
The Industrial Revolution brought widespread impoverishment to workers,
y que solo gracias
and only through state intervention and the modern labor movement did workers begin to experience an increase in their living standard.
un crecimiento en su nivel de vida. He puesto tres
I have listed 3 readings, which are the key revisionist articles on the topic,
temas, empezando por el artículo de
starting with William Hutt's article titled The Factory System of the Early 19th Century.
19, que como ustedes han podido
As you will have noticed when you read it, Hutt systematically demonstrates, using empirical data, that the notion that the Industrial Revolution impoverished the working class is completely false.
puso un empobrecimiento para la clase trabajadora.
Quite the opposite is true.
Todas las estadísticas
All of the statistics and the most rigorous analyses reveal that throughout the entire duration of the Industrial Revolution, a continual improvement in workers' standard of living took place, a continual improvement in per capita income, as well as in all of the qualitative aspects of economic development.
acompañan al desarrollo económico. Por tanto, que fue un periodo
Therefore, it was a period of continuous economic development which benefited mainly the previously less
de
well-off.
menos pudientes. La
The
supuesta
supposed physical deterioration of workers is a myth.
es un mito, no un-
Such deterioration did not occur, and instead there was a very significant improvement with respect to workers' prior circumstances.
en la imagen de los
The
niños.
tragic image we all have in our minds of children working in the factories and the mines in conditions that are absolutely atrocious from a human, moral standpoint does not correspond to reality either.
Como se demuestra en el artículo
As William Hutt shows in his article, the reality was just the opposite. So the question we must ask is, why has a notion contrary to the factual reality of what actually happened persisted, and for such a long time, almost a century, or a century and a half? Well, Hutt concludes, though he does not go into detail in his article, that it was basically due to political and ideological factors. And to study in greater depth the reasons behind these political and ideological factors, we turn to the second article, titled History and Politics, and written by Hayek, who received the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1974. Hayek starts by verifying the existence of this myth. The myth consists of the idea that workers' circumstances worsened during the Industrial Revolution, when the historical reality was just the opposite. According to statistical data, the situation of workers never ceased to improve in all the years of the industrial development period, beginning in the first third of the 19th century.
Solo el hecho
The mere fact that such a fast-growing population could be provided for was an extraordinary success of the fledgling capitalist system, which emerged with the Industrial
de la
Revolution.
revolución industrial. Entonces se plantea
Hayek then sets about explaining what is behind this myth, and he analyzes a series of causes, specifically 3. First, an effect that is almost psychological and
un
cultural.
aumento del desarrollo económico
For when there is an increase in economic development
se extiende y se
and a
expande.
rise in wealth, which to a greater or a lesser extent spreads to
En
everyone,
paralelo, un
then
aumento
there is a parallel increase, pari passu, in the awareness of poverty itself.
cada vez que nos
In other
enriquecemos.
words, the more we prosper, the more shocked and saddened we are by the poverty we see around us.
Que vemos a nuestro alrededor. Sin embargo, como científicos,
However, as scientists, we must compare each historical period with the circumstances that preceded it,
situaciones anteriores a ese momento histórico, no
rather than judge it based on our current or modern perspective. Since from our current or modern perspective, every situation marginally poorer than our own invariably draws our attention and shocks us. It somehow makes our consciences much more sensitive.
es estudiar cuál era la situación
What we must do is consider the circumstances of workers prior to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, And when we do that, we find truly dreadful circumstances.
pavorosas.
Dear students, before the Industrial Revolution, before the emergence of modern capitalism, the situation of workers was absolutely horrible.
Horrible. A pesar
Despite the idyllic image,
de la
peddled
etapa
to us by the most varied means, of the stage prior to the Industrial Revolution, for example, I remember the famous TV series Little House on the Prairie. Well, those of us with a grey hair or two will remember that Little House on the Prairie always presented an idyllic view of what country life was like. Country life was portrayed as marvellous, a charming house on a hill, in a prairie full of poppies and other flowers, with a happy family. The father, the mother, everyone in lovely clothes, the happy girls running through the meadow in embroidered dresses. Everything was wonderful, green, pristine. The sky was blue, the sun was shining, and in startling contrast to that idyllic image of what country life was like, we are presented with an image of factory life. We are shown the suburb of an English city. It is all dark, it rains all day long, it is foggy and smoky, the streets are dirty, the children are in rags. David Copperfield. When people see that, they react and say, the Industrial Revolution was awful. How good life was before the Industrial Revolution. The truth is just the opposite. Country life was extremely hard. People worked extremely hard from dawn till dusk, all day long, without a day off. And what for? To stay at mere subsistence level, where the slightest change in circumstances, like a livestock disease, a flood, or a meteorological phenomenon, could ruin everything, and mean the difference between life and death by starvation. Such was the very tough life in the country, the life people lived before the Industrial Revolution.
Queridos alumnos, de que esto era así.
And the proof of this, dear students, is that once word got around,
Y
at
entonces,
first a few people emigrated, and then they started working in the factories.
que tú
Then word got around, and other people said, so you have found a steady job in which you are paid regardless of the weather conditions? What luck! What a deal! And you say you also have a fixed schedule of 12 hours a day, instead of the 18 I work. How wonderful! And they give you half a day off on Sunday afternoons? What a great arrangement! How did you get this work? How could I get it?
y por comunicación de viva voz,
And when, by word of mouth, people found out, most of the agricultural workers left the countryside en masse
previamente agrícolas,
and moved to the city and its suburbs to try to get work as factory workers.
como trabajadores en las fábricas. Miren, esa
That is the acid test. Spontaneously, without being coerced by anyone, people left the countryside on a massive scale to go to work where the factories were. And from their point of view, according to all the historical studies, they improved their standard of living very considerably in doing so. It is just that, from a modern-day perspective, from the viewpoint of refined and generally affluent people with a high standard of living, the novels of Charles Dickens are moving and heart-wrenching. However, this does not detract a bit from the truth of what I am saying. There was a continuous improvement in the living standard, and it was illustrated by the very desires of farm workers, who realized that they benefited substantially if they went to work at the factories. Furthermore, the Industrial Revolution brought with it another very important development, the redirection of the entire production process toward, for the first time in history, the working classes. Until the Industrial Revolution, the few industrial artisans there were made luxury products for the very wealthy, for aristocrats, from carriages to those spectacular dresses we have all seen, embroidered with gold thread and beautifully trimmed, and high-heeled shoes. All of that changed radically. With capitalism, the entrepreneurs and the bourgeois realized that they needed to produce goods and services at very low prices precisely for the workers. I am going to ask you to do something now. Would those of you who are wearing jeans today please stand up? You, for example. Everyone who is wearing jeans. Let's see. Who is wearing jeans today? Look at that. Over half the class. Thank you very much. You may sit down. Do you know when jeans were invented? Jeans as an article of clothing were not invented by an entrepreneur to dress aristocrats and landowners. No, they were a brilliant idea, a comfortable and durable cotton garment which, due to economies of scale, could be produced in huge numbers by the thousands at a very low price, and made available to millions and millions of people who before had been dressed in rags. The garment was so successful that, as we have just seen here, over half of students are still coming to class in jeans today. Jeans are a typical example of a product of the Industrial Revolution in the area of textiles. The second cause Hayek cites for the myth is quite important. The survival of the myth up to the present day has been due not only to the mistaken comparison of living standards based on the current perspective rather than the historical one to determine whether they improved or deteriorated. The persistence of the myth and its total corruption are due also to a political struggle, specifically the political struggle that took place at the time of the Industrial Revolution. Two large parties were competing for power in the United Kingdom: the Conservative Tory Party and the Liberal Whig Party. The Liberal Party represented the thriving entrepreneurial bourgeoisie who were bringing about the capitalist industrial revolution. Meanwhile, the Tory Party represented the old aristocratic and landowning interests. Well, a sort of alliance formed between opposing forces. While the Industrial Revolution was in the process of beginning, a socialist revolutionary movement was also beginning, and its objective was to hinder, paralyze, criticize, and vilify the development of capitalism. And here, aristocrats and socialists became bedfellows. You see, dear students, aristocrats, landowners, and English noblemen were watching, terrified, as their dominance became increasingly threatened. They watched as their workers abandoned their land, the workers who, generation after generation, had lived in quasi-servitude, serving the landowning family. And now? Listen, we really care a lot about you, Lord whoever, but I am leaving to work on the outskirts of Manchester because the pay is higher. I will work less, and I will have more security. So landowners were aware that they were losing the workers on their land. The danger was the vigorous development of bourgeois capitalism. So they came up with a systematic plan to criticize the factory system. In large part, they were the ones who sponsored the creation of parliamentary committees to criticize the emerging factories, to try to reveal a supposed physical and moral deterioration of the children working in the mines. In any case, when they were working in the mines, that was a much better situation for them than the previous job they had been obliged to do, in the fields, in their own homes, in a state of quasi-servitude to the landowners. Though it may seem paradoxical, all of these committees established to attack capitalism were sponsored largely by the Tory or Conservative Party, which somehow agreed to collaborate, if only temporarily, with the socialist revolutionaries, who, for other reasons and with other objectives, also wished to do away with the capitalist system. The third cause Hayek mentions for the myth consists of all the undermining efforts of supposed intellectual progressives on the left, who systematically interpret events in a biased manner, and always to shed a negative light on the capitalist economic system. I'm not going to dwell on this any further. We discussed it the other day, when we talked about the very serious harm that has been done when a systematic attempt has been made to brainwash workers, thus embittering them and robbing them of joy in a job well done within the capitalist economic process, and trying to replace this with a sort of resentment which comes from being alienated or exploited by the owners of the company one works for.